Hello, folks. It's Wendy with New Bern Now, and we're here with Sound River Keepers. There's two of you, Sam and Jill. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hey, y'all. I'm Samantha Krop. I'm your Neuse Riverkeeper.
And I'm Jill Howell. I'm the Pamlico-Tar Riverkeeper.
Okay. And you're with Sound Rivers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, Sam, do you want to? You don't want to see my face there. Okay. So, Sam, do you want to explain what the Neuse Riverkeeper does? Just an overview.
Sure. And thanks so much, Wendy, for having us on the show. Jill and I work with Sound Rivers, me on the Neuse and her on the Pamlico-Tar, and we work on a lot of issues. Basically, our job is to monitor and protect both of our watersheds. And so, we pay attention to and work on all kinds of issues that impact water quality and affect the waterways that all of us rely on, from the water that we drink to the water that we swim in and the water that we fish from. These are the issues that we pay attention to. And so that ranges from a whole variety of things, from coal ash pollution to sediment or dirt getting into our streams, to pollution running off of streets and sidewalks going into our waterways, to contamination from factory farms and sewage systems. And sometimes our work looks like going out and investigating and responding to concerns that folks report from the river. Sometimes it looks like advocacy. So basically being the advocate on behalf of the river and trying to get better policies and regulations passed. And sometimes it looks like education. And a lot of times it looks like science. We're going out there and we're sampling water quality and trying to determine the sources of different issues that we see in the water. And so it's a pretty varied job. But today we really wanted to share with you one of the things that we discovered recently. Actually, we discovered a sort of shocking environmental disaster through one of our kind of investigative avenues of work that we do. And so that's what we wanted to share today, is just something that we discovered through that monitoring work that we do as part of our job.
Okay.
And if it's okay, I can just jump right into it.
I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. So as part of our work monitoring the watershed, we not only go out and we investigate things on foot. A lot of folks think about water keepers as being on the river all the time, and certainly we do get out on the water itself. But one of the tools that we have in our toolbox is actually getting up into the air, and we're able to do flyovers in small little planes of our watershed. And we do these flyovers sometimes on an investigative basis, and other times we just do sort of routine flyovers of the watershed to just get a sense of what's happening from the sky. It gives us a really unique perspective and allows us to see things that we normally might not be able to see or access on the ground. And so it was through one of these actually kind of routine aerial monitoring missions that I was a part of, and flew over this facility that's pictured right here. And so this is located in Fremont in Wayne County, right along the creek called Nahunta Swamp. And that feeds into the Contentnia Creek, which ends up feeding into the Neuse River. And I noticed this facility was different right away, because I realized this was a facility set up to generate biogas, in which we'll talk about a little bit later and give a little more explanation of what that is. But it's set up to capture biogas from swine waste. And I didn't actually know that there were any swine biogas facilities in the Neuse watershed. And so this prompted me to kind of look a little bit closer. But also immediately looking closer at this, noticed that something didn't quite seem right with this facility as a biogas facility. Right off of the bat, it was apparent that the cover itself that we're kind of looking at, it looks like sort of a deflated parachute. That struck me as being, oddly deflated. There's water pooling up on top of it. So it clearly, it's supposed to be sort of covering that area and generating the biogas underneath. And it was not doing that clearly. And what also struck me was that a lot of the sand and earth around these biogas pools was moved around. And so clearly there had been some earth moving activity, and that earth moving activity looked like it kind of went up and into the wetland and swamp area. And so that immediately raised some flags for me. We, as Sound Rivers, had not heard any reports of issues that had been ongoing at this facility. Again, we did not know that there were any swine biogas facilities in the Neuse watershed. And so, taking a closer look at these photos, we decided to do some digging in the public records available to us to try and get information about what's actually going on here. And so we did a deep dive in the Department of Environmental Quality. They're the regulatory body on the state level that's responsible for kind of managing and overseeing these facilities, also known as DEQ. We did some digging in the DEQ's database of public records, went through a history of documents on this facility, and we were pretty surprised and disturbed by what we found.
So I'll jump in here. And Wendy, if you can pull up the pictures of the actual spill. So what we found when we went looking was a report of a pretty major spill at this facility. So according to records that we looked at 3 a.m., so the middle of the night on May 30th, which is Memorial Day weekend of this past year, White Oak Farms / Legacy Biogas, so this facility in Fremont, their swine operation or swine CAFO, so they house a whole lot of pigs completely indoors. They're permitted for 65,000 hogs. They're also permitted to capture this biogas underneath that black tarp. They reported that the cover on their hog lagoon, so that black covering over the big waste lagoon, that cover ruptured, resulting in more than 3 million gallons of foam. And that foam was comprised of decomposing hog waste, dead hogs, and food waste products like hot dogs and deli meat. More than 3 million gallons of that spilled out of this ruptured cover and spilled across the property. In some places, it ended up like feet deep across the property, and it spilled towards Nahunta Swamp. So that entire property is right next to a waterway. Nahunta Swamp is a public access waterway, which flows into Contentnea Creek, which flows into the Neuse. So major spill reported in May to the agency. Over the next couple weeks, DEQ, they were on site multiple times, sort of monitoring and responding to what happened. And over the course of these next couple weeks, that foam product comprised of all that material, the hog waste, the dead hogs, and the food waste, that continued to ooze out of the digester for weeks. So that's sort of like based on what Sam saw, what we went digging for, and then what we kind of discovered in all of these records was a really large and pretty extensive environmental spill that not only resulted in this foam all over the place on this property, but also ending up in surface waters. Before we get any deeper into what we continue to find out and what we continue to learn about this, I want to just pause and kind of give some background context for anybody that isn't super familiar with how hog farming or biogas works. So very briefly, the majority of hogs in North Carolina are raised in what are called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. So hogs are raised in pretty large numbers. Usually each facility has like thousands of hogs. They're raised completely indoors in barns for the duration of their lives. In these barns, they are on a floor that is essentially slatted. Yeah, so in the photo right here, those kind of like long shed looking things, those are the barns that house the pigs. So pigs live in there. They're on floors that are essentially slatted. So their waste drops down through the slatted floors. The waste is washed into what's called lagoons, but is essentially just an open pit of waste. Like there's no lining. It's just you dig a pit, and that's where the waste is stored. then this is called sort of like how hogs are managed in North Carolina is the lagoon and spray field system. So waste is stored in those lagoons, and then the liquid waste is sprayed onto adjacent fields as fertilizer, and the solids sort of settle to the bottom. Biogas and a facility like this can cover those lagoons to capture some of the methane. So when waste is in a giant pit like this, it breaks down over time. And if you cover that lagoon, it will anaerobically digest. So essentially it'll break down, and the gases that are released when that waste is breaking down will get captured under the black cover that looks like a giant tarp. And then you can essentially siphon off that methane and turn it into electricity. So it's just a different way to manage waste and also try to capture some of the methane to generate electricity. So we don't see, there's a lot of hog CAFOs, hog farms with these lagoons in Eastern North Carolina. There are not a lot of facilities that have their lagoons covered with these covers to capture biogas. But we are sort of anticipating an expansion of this industry across North Carolina for a number of reasons. I guess the first is like there was a joint venture, if you will, between Dominion Energy, one of the big energy companies, and Smithfield, who is basically one of the biggest hog integrators. They supply the pigs to these hog farms across Eastern North Carolina. They started a new venture called Align Renewable Gas, and proposed covering 19 facilities, lagoons, in Duplin and Sampson counties, building pipelines to get the methane to a processing facility, turning that into usable gas and putting it into a pipeline, a natural gas pipeline. The other piece of this is there's now a general permit through the state as of this past June that will allow almost any hog CAFO in Eastern North Carolina to apply for coverage, cover their lagoons, and start generating electricity. So there's not a whole lot of biogas right now, but we anticipate there will be. And industry, so Smithfield, some of the energy companies like Dominion, some of the CAFO operators kind of see biogas as a really green, climate-friendly, environmentally friendly solution. We and others strongly disagree, sort of regardless of what happened here, which we'll get into more. Covering lagoons doesn't do a whole lot to address the existing problems with hog CAFOs. In order to generate biogas, you still need to have some sort of at least under the system, you need to have open lagoons still. So if you cover the lagoon, that's great for that lagoon in terms of protecting it from excess rainfall and overtopping. But you're not getting rid of the total number of open lagoons. If you cover one, you got to build sort of another open pit for secondary treatment. You still have to spray this waste, covered or not covered, you're still going to be generating liquid. You still need to spray it on adjacent fields. And now if you cover it and no rain's getting inside, that liquid that's ending up on fields actually could have more, higher concentrations of pollutants in it. And the other, two other things, these lagoons are kind of reaching the end of their lifetime. Most of them were built in the early to mid 90s. So they've been around for quite some time, and they're engineered structures, but they are unlined pits. They're not meant to last forever. So now we're investing all this money and new technology to cover these failing systems. We're just entrenching the lagoon and spray field system when we could instead be investing in other forms of waste management. And the final piece is we don't believe, and we don't know that the state agency is ready for a whole bunch of facilities to start covering their lagoons and generating biogas. Like, that's a whole new skill set. That is a whole lot more work for an agency that is already has limited capacity. We're concerned that if this sort of expands exponentially across the state, that the state agency will not be able to monitor these properly and make sure that other disasters like this, like a rupture in cover, doesn't happen on a more wide scale spread, I guess. So that's touching on a lot of very different things. I know I went through that pretty quick, but wanted to just provide some context on CAFOs, how waste is managed at big hog farms like this, and also biogas. So I'll turn it back over to Sam to talk a little bit more about the specifics about what we found with some of that context now laid out.
Yeah, and thanks for laying out that context, Jill. And I think just before I dive into the other pieces around sort of the other layers of this issue with the specific facility we're looking at in this picture, I just want to have, I just want to say clearly that, we're about to talk about a lot of things that we see as failings on behalf of the Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. And we want to recognize that although we do see a lot of systemic issues, especially from the central agency, we definitely also acknowledge that there are a lot of good folks who are in the Department of Environmental Quality who we work with and who are doing the best that they can under the circumstances that they're in, which are, being pretty hamstrung, having little resources, and being in a sticky position in an agency that isn't always resourced and willing to do the job that it's supposed to do on a regulatory standpoint. And so just to give that disclaimer, we recognize, and work with a lot of great folks. And a huge part of this issue is that the Department of Environmental Quality essentially, knew that there was an ongoing issue at this facility and did not do what it could have done to prevent the major discharge incident that Jill just talked about happening. And so I want to talk a little bit about the lead up to that May incident and some of the things that happened leading up to that, where we see the regulatory body really having an opportunity to take action. So just to be clear, this was not a one-time incident. The May incident certainly is shocking. The photos speak for themselves. What Jill described really speaks for itself. But this issue has a long history of violations. Really, starting in 2013, it got an initial permit to cover one of their lagoons and transfer from a standard swine facility to a biogas generating facility. And from that point, there started to be issues. In 2018, they began digesting, and so accepting into this biogas digester food byproducts from Smithfield. And then in 2019, the facility was granted the ability to start adding dead hogs from other facilities. And so this is where, we see them beginning to do sort of what we call experimental biogas generation. Again, something that we had never heard of happening was the acceptance of dead hogs and hot dogs into a biogas generation facility. And so this became experimental at this point. And, meanwhile, not everything was going swimmingly at the facility. At the same time, in 2019, the facility was issued by the Department of Environmental Quality a notice of violation for insufficient reporting. And so they weren't doing what they were supposed to do to ensure that no discharge of this material was going into surrounding groundwater and surface water. They weren't reporting on any of the stuff that they needed, not all of the stuff they needed to be reporting on. And then additionally, that same year, they had to do some maintenance on the cover of the digester. There was an issue with that. And all of this, the Department of Environmental Quality was aware of. When they started accepting more dead hogs, the facility began to essentially run predominantly off of dead hogs. And so there was a tipping point where this was their primary source of generating biogas, was just hog waste, just dead hogs and old hot dogs that were being essentially thrown into this cesspool. And at this point, the facility really started to have problems. And again, this is back in 2020, 2021. In their 2021 annual report, the facility reported that they were, having higher levels of heavy metals and ammonia and phosphorus that they were putting out. And they acknowledged that this was a result of the strange materials they were accepting and putting in. And so this history, is the backdrop to this incident. And not to mention, in February of this year, the Department of Environmental Quality went out for a routine inspection of this facility and found that there had been an illegal discharge into the surrounding area that the facility had then sort of covered with hay. And so another notice of violation was issued at that point. And still, the facility was allowed to continue operating and to continue, doing what it had been doing. And then we get to this May discharge issue where more than 3 million gallons of foam, and, I want to specify, the facility called this waste foam. We believe, that's a euphemism for what it actually was, which is, as we've said many times, frankly, disgusting hog parts and old meat waste and some animal waste. But essentially, that is what got into the surrounding Nahunta swamp area. And, essentially, the Department of Environmental Quality is maintaining that no waste was, reached the waterway itself, but we still have, very little information about how the cleanup happened, and, if there is still runoff happening into waterways, if there could be runoff happening into the local waterway with every major rain. And so history of issues leading up to May. And, we uncovered all of this. I keep calling it like a layered investigation, because the more information that we find, the more we realize that there is truly a history of issues at the site, and truly in numerous opportunities for the Department of Environmental Quality to step in. And so our main takeaways, to sort of summarize what we've said after, going through what we've gone through thus far, and I'm sure there's more to come. But our main takeaways are, number one, the agency, the DEQ, the agency responsible for enforcing our environmental laws isn't sufficiently doing its job. This facility has a clear history of illegally discharging waste and a clear history of not keeping records, and the DEQ did know that and failed to take meaningful action to prevent this pollution event. And so I can't say that enough. That is a huge takeaway. We also, as Jill alluded to earlier, we have serious questions about the technology of biogas. And, one of our takeaways is that this is still an experimental, still a new, and still, in many ways, there are a lot of legitimate questions about the functionality and environmental safeness of industries like this, especially where there's apparently space in, individual permits for things like old meat to be thrown into the mix. It seems like there's still a lot of surrounding questions. And, the key here is that the DEQ doesn't seem to have the expertise and knowledge to regulate these types of very complex, still experimental facilities. And the third one, and I think this is a huge one to hit on, is transparency and the lack thereof. We, discovered all of this because, happened to notice something didn't look right, happened to know how to navigate the Department of Environmental Quality's difficult, not super accessible record system, and did a lot of legwork to try and find out this story. Meanwhile, the facility put out a very small, menial press release in two somewhat obscure local papers stating that there had been a discharge of waste foam. And so, we want to be clear that we believe that this is the kind of environmental disaster that matters to not only the swamp and the creatures in the swamp, but to the people who rely on the swamp and downstream, and that everyone has a right to know not only what happened and when it happened in a timely manner, but what actually was discharged, the content of that toxic foam. And so that did not happen. And our takeaway is that, there isn't enough transparency around this around biogas and around this industry, and specifically around this facility and this history. And we want to see more transparency moving forward on behalf of the Department of Environmental Quality and the facilities that they regulate.
Yeah.
So those are
sorry, I'm flabbergasted. Wow. Go ahead, Jill.
Wendy, we feel you. We also, when we started reading about this, we were like, surely they are not putting dead hogs in hot, like, surely that is not the chosen method, and the Department of Environmental Quality did not sign off on this. So your sort of reaction as to like us finding out more and more as we read about this and what was approved and what was proposed despite all of the problems, your reaction is one that we shared. We've just now been under this for a couple weeks and maybe be a little desensitized to all of it.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. You just see it. It's like, yeah, okay, it's normal. It's not normal. It's definitely not normal, but you just desensitized. Yes, good word.
Yeah. So with everything that we've said so far, that is like what we know right now. And I want to emphasize that there, in addition to like what we know, there's also some stuff that we still have questions about, and we're still looking into. So after we discovered this and after we started looking into DEQ's records, we realized there were records missing. So not everything that is public record was up on DEQ's online database. So we asked DEQ, we filed a formal public information request requesting specific things that were missing that we need to see in order to like fully understand the whole scope of this, like old records, some recent ones, but we're still waiting on that, and they are taking quite a while. I think we're on week 3 or 4 of waiting now. So we still have just general questions that we can't answer yet. Another question is, based on records, there was a February incident that the facility didn't report. The inspector just happened to be there and happened to step on the hay and sunk down into this spill. So discovered that incident. And then there was this May incident where the millions of gallons oozed out of this digester cover. But we question whether these were like 2 discrete incidents or if there have been other major or ongoing issues with this leaking lagoon for a while. And I say that because we, as part of our trying to learn more and to look further into this, it's great to be able to get up in the air, but seeing the facility from the air only shows you that facility and what it looks like on that day. And we wanted to know what it looked like, when it was back in May, when the spill happened, back in February, when there was maybe a smaller minor spill, and then kind of like what it looked like when it was supposedly operating properly. So we started looking at historic satellite imagery. And one of the things that Sam noticed when she flew over was there was a bunch of trees. When she flew over in August, there was a bunch of trees that were dead between the lagoon and the swamp. It wasn't like they had been cut and cleared or sort of, like it wasn't like somebody cut them down on purpose. There were dead trees in a way that just looked odd. And so looking back at satellite imagery, both like the dead trees and this sort of like pretty significant earthwork around the lagoons, there's a clear moment in time where it begins. It's somewhere in the summer, in the late summer, early fall last year. Looking back at historic photos back from the 90s, you can see what it used to look like back then. You can see in 2013 when they put the cover on. You can see the facility sort of looking pretty much the same from 2013 for like years. And then in the late summer, early fall, there's that we don't have daily satellite imagery, so we're using what we have, and the image from the spring shows everything looking okay. And then the images in late fall, and especially in November of 2021, show a ton of earthwork and dirt being moved in one corner and those dead trees. And so we can't, conclusively say what happened or didn't happen. But what we do know is that this facility has had a history of not reporting spills. They did not report that February spill. This facility has a history of issues happening here and being cited by the state. So we're concerned that maybe we're not getting the full story and there were other unreported spills. We are also aware that there is groundwater contamination on the property. There is a groundwater monitoring well between the covered digester lagoon that spilled and the swamp where the surface waters are. We've seen very limited data from that well. The data we have seen is hugely concerning with levels of nitrogen and levels of bacteria. So unclear, like what happened prior to February, and if there was an event, or maybe there's a slow leak, or maybe it's just groundwater contamination that's been there for a while. We don't have the full picture, but we're concerned about the full scope of it, and we're not sure if we'll ever fully understand it.
And another piece, I think that's worth mentioning here when we're talking about our questions around the timeline and the duration of these issues is, we also know that there had been issues downstream of this facility in the water around the same time. And so around the same time, just actually, a few days before the May spill was reported, there was reported a major fish kill on Contentnia Creek downstream of where Nahunta Swamp connects with Contentnia Creek. When I say major, what I mean is there was a large variety, a diversity of different kinds of fish. It wasn't just, menhaden that were coming belly up. This is a lot of different kinds of fish and large fish. Folks were sending us photos of 40 to 50 pound catfish that were coming up dead in Contentnia Creek. And so this was a significant enough fish kill for us to get a phone call with Sound Rivers, for neighbors and folks who are residents of the area around Snow Hill, who are regular visitors to Contentnia Creek, to call us and say, this is sort of unprecedented in our experience. This is very strange, and also warranted the Department of Environmental Quality to go out and check it out. And their response and they're quoted in in a newspaper piece on this fish kill as saying that this is not the result of any, point source or any one source of discharge or pollution. And so, we obviously have questions about that given the history of this facility's issues, given the known discharge back in February, and, given the satellite imagery that Jill saw, and given that this is downstream. And there were significant rains around this time that would have, definitely pushed pollution and could have definitely pushed pollution downstream. And so we, again, to reiterate, we see this as an issue beyond, just what we know happened at the facility itself so far. We are seriously concerned about the impacts that this discharge had on, the water system itself and folks who rely on it. And, at the same time, we've got questions about, who lives near the facility and if neighbors who live near this facility have been impacted. We would imagine that the answer is yes, but we don't have all of these answers. We don't know, who's impacted, who lives nearby. And, a big question mark that remains is, how did this cleanup happen? And is it all cleaned up? I mentioned this earlier, is there is there pollution running off with every major rain? Has anything been removed? Where has it been removed to from the property? Lots of big questions about impacts and the cleanup process.
Sort of continuing with other questions we have, this facility and these operators, they didn't do this alone. There were others that were involved sort of in this operation. And what I think we did I think we emphasized how much blame rests on the Department of Environmental Quality, the agency that's responsible for protecting the environment and people. And if something goes wrong, letting them know potential threats to them. But aside from them, like this facility was taking dead hogs from other facilities and grinding them up and putting them into their lagoon. Those dead hogs are coming from somewhere else. Those food waste products are coming from somewhere else. So when Smithfield Foods brings their expired like hot dogs and deli meats to this facility, what responsibility do they have in knowing, like, once they drop it off, is, you know, do they just leave? Or, I mean, like, they're partially responsible too. Like, you need to know what is happening with when you're disposing of things, that it's not causing environmental harm on the other end. So like farms that are bringing hogs there, or Smithfield that is bringing deli waste, like they are sort of enabling and allowing this facility to continue operating. There needs to be some responsibility taken when you're disposing of this stuff that you clearly don't want. You need to get rid of your dead hogs. You need to get rid of your expired food products. You got to know how that's going to end up. The other piece is like Duke Energy is buying, or we should say, I don't know that we said this at all. The facility is not currently operating. They don't have any hogs. They're not operating right now. But when they were operating, they have a tie-in with Duke Energy. So Duke Energy buys the electricity that this facility generates, you know, to put back into the grid for North Carolina. That's a problem. You know, like you can't just sort of look the other way and purchase this electricity while the production of it is causing such major environmental harm. So just want to flag and those things. And we're not commenting a ton on that because we don't fully know. We don't know, you know, how many farms are bringing their dead hogs to this facility. We don't know, is it just Smithfield? Are there others that are bringing this sort of expired food waste? There's a lot of questions that we don't know the answers to, but still worth mentioning and bringing up. And then the other piece that is not our area expertise, where Riverkeepers are focused on the waterways, there's a whole separate issue with the air pollution that happened here that we have not really investigated, and also have not heard anything from the agency on. So when that 3 million gallons of foam ruptured and spilled out of the digester cover, what also came out of that digester cover were all of the gases that were trapped within that cover that ultimately would have been siphoned off to create electricity. We don't know the quantity of how much was released, but what we do know is that when waste like that is breaking down, what's underneath that digester cover are huge volumes of gases and things that are potentially harmful to human health. So things like ammonia. So, I mean, like what we imagine, because we don't know otherwise, because we haven't seen any records on any of this, is that like this thing ruptured and all of the gas within this giant digester cover was released at the same time, like potentially at really concerning levels for not only the property owners who like live on that farm, but also neighbors around. And so not only did DEQ not notify anybody of the foam into Nahunta Swamp, they didn't notify anybody about these like toxic air emission levels. So there's still clearly a lot of questions. We don't know if we'll ever know the answers to some of them, but like don't want to let them go and let them go without being said, because we should know the answers to these things. That's what DEQ is there for. They're there to make sure these things don't happen, and when they do, to like warn everybody that they have happened and how it could impact them. So I guess sort of like that's our wrap up of what we know now, the questions that we still have remaining. But in terms of like where we go from here, we've learned pretty much everything we can learn without some additional documents from DEQ. So we're waiting for those for the full picture. We also sent a letter last week, I believe, to DEQ, outlining pretty much everything that we knew and requesting some specific actions from them. And those actions included some things related to the facility's permit. So this facility was originally allowed to house about 5,000 hogs. In 2013, when they covered the digester, they were allowed to add 60,000 more hogs. We're asking the DEQ to rescind that permit. They were only allowed to add 60,000 more hogs under the sort of agreement that the waste management of this facility would be better than the lagoon and spray field system, not worse. So we're asking for them to rescind the permit. We're asked the permit that allowed that big jump from 5 to 65,000. We're also asking that this facility not be able to restart operation until everything is cleaned up. So the digester cover is fixed, the groundwater contamination is delineated and remediated, and the entire cleanup has occurred. So that's as far as site-specific things. We're also asking, because we don't know, and I don't know that DEQ knows either, we're asking them to do a pretty robust groundwater monitoring and surface water quality monitoring program. We want them to prove that there are no impacts. You can't just say that cleanup is done. We need some confirmation, and we want them to be doing sampling, during dry times and also after it rains. If it rains and there's still waste running off, that cleanup is not done. So we want them to do some confirmatory sampling. And I'm trying to think if there's any other, those are some of the major things. But as far as other things of DEQ, we do want to still know, what their plan is for what we anticipate to be an expansion of digesters across the state. Y'all approved a permit, made it really easy for these facilities to apply for coverage. Now you need to get yourselves ready so that this doesn't happen again. And not that everybody is going to be adding dead pigs and hot dogs under their lagoons. In fact, they're not allowed to under the general permit. But you need to have an agency that has the capacity and the knowledge to go out to these sites and know if there are major issues going on. Somebody was on site at this facility in February. They could have known, they could have stopped it before it got to the point where it literally burst and oozed for weeks. So that's sort of where we're at right now. We'll keep the public kind of updated on any sort of actions they're able to take, any actions that we're gonna take, whether it be continued talks or anything else with the Department of Environmental Quality or that individual facility. But we're not, now that we know all this, we're not done. This is far from sort of over. And we're just, I guess, trying to make it through the cleanup and making sure this doesn't happen again somewhere else.
Yeah. So to kind of summarize, and then we can stop talking and see if you have any questions for us. But to kind of summarize where we're at right now, this was a big issue, obviously, a major contamination issue for the Neuse watershed. And it opened up a lot of questions, including unanswered questions, the ones that Jill just talked about. We've got questions about oversight. We've got questions about safety. We've got questions about environmental impacts of these facilities. And so we think we need to proceed cautiously and probably have more oversight and more attention paid to this facility and this industry that is essentially being green lighted and, called climate friendly and greenwashed. We want more attention and care given to this, and maybe a slowdown before we continue to hustle into expanding this industry across our watersheds. At the same time, we really want the Department of Environmental Quality to have the resources and ability and will to do their job and do it well. And we want, strong environmental regulations, but we also want those regulations to be enforced. And so that is very huge. We need strong laws on the books, and we also need strong regulators with the will to enforce them, so that these issues don't happen again. And then the big one, we want more transparency, and we need more transparency. This issue has shown that there is a lot of stuff that's going on that is sort of flying under the radar, and that big spills like these multi-million gallon spills can happen. And no one, folks might not know about it. And so, with that, I guess we will close in just saying that, Wendy, we're really appreciative of you offering us space to talk about this, because we want, to get this story out, and we want folks to know about it because it impacts the water and it impacts them. And right now, folks like you are the only reason we're able to get our story out. And so thank you for this opportunity, and happy to kind of like close our story there and answer any questions you have for us.
Wow. Thank you both for all that you do, and your team of volunteers and staff and everyone, all the contributors, the people that donate monetarily and in any way to Sound Rivers. Once again, we're with Sam, Krop, and Jill. Howell. Sorry. Your name's not on the screen. Anyway, Jill's the Pamlico-Tar Riverkeeper, and Sam is the Neuse Riverkeeper. And I don't know if the general public, if people have never done a public records request, it's frustrating. You have questions and you send it in and you wait. Sometimes it could take over a month. Who knows how long it could take, right? Then you get the answer back and it's like a sentence. And then it's like, oh, I should have asked this, and then it's just back and forth. So if the public is out there, and if people, just like you said, people were sending you photos, right? If people in surrounding the neighborhoods or down river see things that are just not normal, they need to contact. If you all are listening, and if you see something that has not doesn't seem right to you, please contact Sound Rivers at soundrivers.org. And do you all want to give your phone number or anything out, or what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, well, folks can email us or call us. Jill and I both have our own email addresses, and those are actually on the Sound Rivers website, but they're pretty easy. They're just our names at soundrivers.org. And then we have, an office in Washington and an office in New Bern and an office in Raleigh. And so you can find those numbers on our website and call whichever office makes sense. And obviously, if you call the wrong office, we'll put you through to the right one. We all are, like you just said, really eager to get calls from folks who are essentially our eyes and ears on the ground. You hit it right on the head, Wendy. We can't do this work without folks who are paying attention and calling things in. And, it just so happens that in this case, we were able to, uncover something, happenstance, but usually we need folks who are, paying attention on the ground. And so the folks who called in the fish kill, the folks who have been, if there's anyone listening who, has any experiences, if there's any neighbors to this facility, if there's any folks who, have any information or would like to share anything, we love to get those calls from folks, and they help us a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I can't wrap my brain around transport. I've had, my background was in healthcare, and I've dealt with deceased bodies before, and there's ways of handling bio waste, and I'm just do they drive trucks down the road to this farm? I mean, I don't and how healthy is that for the handler? There's so many, wow. There's just so many different ways to look at this. And when you were talking about the different gases being released into the air, I'm thinking about, but I just love to go into the Croatan, and I'm just thinking about the animals, the wildlife, the birds. Have you been in contact with, I'm not sure if NC Wildlife does any of, deals with, do they do investigating on any kind of stuff like this or not? Do you have any idea? I know you're the water keepers, so river keepers.
Yeah, so the Department of Environmental Quality, they have a number of different divisions, and they're not wildlife, but the Division of Water Resources within the Department of Environmental Quality, they're the ones that oversee these facilities, biogas, and sort of just the regular hog farms. So they're the agency, although I believe I can't remember what agency was out there investigating the fish kill. That may have been in Contentnea Creek. That may have been somebody different. But yeah, the Wildlife Resource Commission, I guess, would be the one maybe to about any sort of wildlife impacts. But I mean, this happened months ago now,
Right.
Like,
and the people with drinking.
I don't know if we don't know what kind of interagency communications there were. Like, did DWR call wildlife and say there was a spill? Can you head out to Nahunta Swamp and see if there's any dead fish and dead birds next to the facility? We don't think that happened. Based on everything that we know, we don't think that happened. We know that the Corps of Engineers, who is responsible for blue line stream, jurisdictional waters of the United States that are public to people, and wetlands. They were not called about this. I believe Sam informed them of this incident. So there was no sort of interagency interaction there, despite the fact that some of this waste made it to wetlands and did make it to surface waters. And they should have been called and consulted on a cleanup.
So when you said there was not in the general permit for this farm to be able to, I can't remember how it was discovered about did they receive a permit for dead hogs and hot dogs initially, like a special permit originally?
So it was essentially this strange kind of escalation of oddities, I guess. At first, this facility was a standard factory, a swine, factory farm, throwing its waste in this cesspool that was uncovered, and then received a permit to cover the cesspool and generate biogas. And then later received permission under the permit to start digesting, processing food byproducts. And then I believe in 2019, that permit began to expand to cover adding in dead hogs. And so at that point, the permit still did specify that the facility was only allowed to accept a certain percentage of dead hogs for their overall toxic concoction in the cesspool. And, we were shocked to find that the facility was permitted at all to accept, we had never heard of this. But, despite this permit, the facility still violated the conditions of their permit by accepting far more dead hogs than they were supposed to. They began operating primarily on, dead hogs and food waste instead of primarily on liquid waste, which we believe is, clearly what started to cause some major issues at the facility based on their annual reporting and based on what happened next. And so yes and no. Yes, they are permitted to a certain degree to accept these materials, which was a shock to us. No, not this much, not to this degree. The facility still violated the conditions of their permit.
Wow. Okay. All right. So have you spoke with any residents nearby, like as far as has anyone reported any kind of health issues, for drinking or, consuming or bathing? I don't, there's so many different diseases that could possibly be, I don't know.
We have initially received some anonymous complaints about, smells and issues in the surrounding area that neighbors have experienced. We want to learn more about this. This is so new to the public that we believe that there's probably a lot more that we don't know that we're hoping folks can reach out and get in touch with us about. But certainly, we have knowledge of folks in the neighborhood, folks in the area who certainly knew about this facility because of the stench and because of other essentially quality of life impacts that it was having for people in the area.
And this is a little bit of an aside, but if anybody's listening or about this issue or just issues in the future, we've asked previously for folks to get in touch with us if they see something and it doesn't quite look right. We are used to people calling all the time about issues and wanting to remain anonymous, not wanting to be connected in any way to this, oftentimes because you're reporting a neighbor. You notice the most in the place that you live and spend the most time. We are fully equipped to like not disclose anything like that. We're trying to understand the full picture and how far this extends, and like what kind of impact it may be having on people that live nearby. How many people live nearby? There is a middle school less than 2 miles away from here. So has there been any impact on that school? So just want to flag that, like, we will keep anybody's name out who has information and wants to share it, but is concerned about somehow getting caught up in this or caught up in the media or caught up in some sort of dispute with their neighbors that are doing something harmful.
That's a terrific point, Jill, because I mean, I get calls on certain things, and especially being in a small town, people, I respect people's privacy, and I would never want to disclose. I mean, there's no need to disclose somebody's information. It'd be great if people could speak up in public, but there's so many different reasons why people don't. And but I don't believe that you're doing this to, cause harm or ruin somebody's reputation. You're doing it to get to the bottom line, so this doesn't happen again, and I guess that's hopefully the public will realize that. And I mean, as long as I've known about the Neuse Riverkeepers, Sound Rivers, you've always had a stellar reputation, or at least I've never heard anything bad. And I appreciate that, because keeping somebody's confidence is really important. This is scary stuff. I mean, especially when you have, these huge corporations that people do things. Anyway, okay. Who drinks more? People send me photos. Yeah, I'm just okay. If anyone's out there watching this right now, or if you hop on later and watch the show afterwards, let us know if you have any questions. Do you have any questions for Sam or Jill? Anybody?
And while we're waiting on if anyone has a question, and obviously, we shared our contacts, our door remains open for folks to get in touch with us outside of the show. But just to kind of like add to what Jill was just saying, and you were just saying, Wendy, that, folks, circling back to sort of what our job is as river keepers, folks, I think, often think that we're just, working in service of the river itself and, willing to sacrifice the, human happiness over, the health of the river. But I mean, we truly see our job as working not just for the river, but the people, all of the communities who rely on the river. And so, we are, working in service to folks who, live on the Junta Swamp and live on Catania Creek and live on the Neuse River and rely on it and care about it and, go there. And, we're working for those folks. And so that is why we're, concerned about impacts to community members, because we want to know, what's hurting folks who, are people of the watershed. So just want to say that clearly, that we see that as part of our job too.
Yeah, well, it's a big part of your job. And you had also mentioned earlier, if people are just tuning in now, that, let's see here. Okay. Katie, I always get the names mixed up. Langley Hunt. Katie, she was the Neuse Riverkeeper, and now she's one of my favorites. How's your baby? Anyway, you're now you're a scientist, you're a field, what is your title now?
My new title is staff scientist. So I get to do all the fun outside and lab stuff. So whenever we do get reports like this or any other kind of report of pollution, I get to be the one that goes out and does a lot of the investigating with Jill and Sam.
Yeah. Well, and if people want to become citizen scientists, you welcome that too, right?
Yeah, we have our summer swim guide program that just ended. That is is possible because of our rockstar volunteers and citizen scientists, and we are looking to expand our swim guide, at least a smaller version of our swim guide, through year-round sampling. So we will need year-round citizen scientists for that too.
That's fantastic. That's great. What else? Okay, what else? The trash trout junior. How's that going?
Trash trouts are going great. Sam, do you want to talk about the one that's here in New Bern? We got two. I'm running one that's up in Washington, and there is one in New Bern here.
Yeah. So a trash trout is a trash collecting device. It's pretty nifty. Instead of having to like go out there and do a lot of hard labor all of the time and sort of like a pushing the boulder up the hill sort of fashion of cleaning up trash. This trap device, this trout, sort of sits in the river and floats and is ambiently capturing whatever flows towards it while also allowing aquatic creatures that live in the creek to swim underneath or through the holes in it. So it's just really capturing floating trash. And we have worked with the city of New Bern to install one in Jack Smith Canal, which flows into Duffy Field Canal, which then flows into the Neuse. And so that is kind of like a small tributary of another tributary that has a big impact on the Neuse watershed. And it's sitting there and collecting trash all the time. And we do cleanouts about once every few weeks and are always looking for volunteers to help us. So if anyone's listening and is like, that sounds awesome, I want to help clean up my neighborhood and my community, we want you to help us. And we would love it if you got in touch with us for that too.
And you every time you empty it, you count individually the different items that you, right?
Yeah, we do a assessment of what's in there and try and get a sense of what all of the trash is that's getting into the creek. And definitely is kind of surprising. You would think that it's just, whatever people are throwing into the creek, but it's really a reminder that, with stormwater, everything that's on the sidewalk gets pushed into our creeks. And so your trash, on land, on the sidewalks, going in there, we find all kinds of things. And another piece of that project is that we're not only looking at the big pieces of sort of like macro trash, but we're also looking at the microplastics, the tiny little invisible pieces that often a lot of these big pieces break down into. And so we've been doing some sampling for microplastics on these creeks where we have our trash trouts in New Bern and Washington, and we're getting ready to put one in Raleigh also.
Wow.
To get a bigger sense of sort of the level and scope of plastics contamination in our waterways.
It's pretty amazing. I saw the presentation during the Board of Aldermen meeting, so that was pretty cool. And yeah, so is there anything else that you want to mention? Any questions from the audience? Anybody? Okay, just real quick, I'm going to show the photos one more time. How's that sound?
Maybe Jill can describe them because they're so exciting.
Okay, here we go.
All right. So
there we go.
So this is above the facility. So this is a photo taken from the plane. So all of the white shed barns looking things, that's where all of the pigs live. The two, I guess they sort of look like muddy pits that are right next to each other, that are just below the barns. Those are the open lagoons. So that is swine waste just hanging out in there. To the right of that, the black tarp looking thing, that is the digester cover. So underneath that is a lagoon that looks just like the one to the left. but it's covered. So if this were operating properly, there would be, you can see like the puddles of water and the dirt all over that. That cover would be just like one, honestly, big giant balloon. The gases would inflate it so that it would be pretty smooth, taut around the edges, and there would be no standing water and there wouldn't be like dirt all over it. Or to the right of the lagoon cover, see all of that? You can see the little patches of grass. That entire area should be grass. There is a requirement in the permit that the berms or the sort of like mounded edges of the lagoon have to be vegetated. They have to be covered so that when it rains, it doesn't just wash away. You can see there's like all sorts of fresh dirt and potentially unsure what it is, whether it's just dirt or whether it's like remaining foam waste, kind of all around the outside and then also in between the lagoons and the digester cover. Yeah, so that's that one.
So just real quick, so Sam, when you were flying over in the airplane or helicopter?
Airplane.
Airplane.
Helicopter would be fun.
Is that how you notice? It's like, wait a minute, why isn't there any grass? Like, what?
Yeah, it was, I didn't know there was biogas being generated in the Neuse. So I was like, this is a strange facility. B, I knew that the cover didn't look quite right. Like Jill just said, it wasn't taut. Clearly there's like stuff on top of it. It was lying flat. It just looked like it wasn't functioning properly. And then C, the, earth moving around there. Clearly some like recent renovations had been done, which indicated to me that there had been a problem that went a little bit into that swamp area. And so that's what prompted me to ask the Army Corps, because they deal with wetlands, if they knew, and they did not. And so we dug deeper.
Wow, that's just unbelievable.
So this is the same thing, just a different view. And if you look in the top left corner, it's a little hard to see, but the top center, there's clearly trees. It's like a forested area. Right to the left of that in the top left corner is this like weird kind of cleared area and sort of out of the screen, but a little further back is the swamp. So there was clearly a spot where trees had been and trees were dead or dying. That it was strange. We know what like logged land looks like and what it looks like to purposefully cut down trees, and that's not what this was. So that was the other piece that looked really strange here.
Wow, that's just unreal.
And then so all of the photos from the air from us and all the photos, because we're not allowed on that facility, from the ground are from the Department of Environmental Quality when they went out there in response to the spill event. So even though that kind of just like looks like dirt, that is the foam. And if you're listening to this, I'm using air quotation marks because the word foam is what was used by the agency in the facility. To us, this is not foam. That is sort of just a nicer way to talk about this. This is a slurry of dead hogs and swine waste and hot dogs, essentially. So that's like covering across the property right there. Again, more of it. And so this, for some scale, so if you look kind of like way back, actually, so when we were talking about go back one. So we were talking about the cover being like inflated and looking different. So this is immediately after the rupture. So there was still some gas left in there, but that's what the cover should look like. It should be inflated like that. And that's not what Sam saw when she flew in August. But if you look kind of, I don't know how big a screens people will be watching this on, but if you see the barn with the open door back there, the white thing right to the right of it, right there, that's a propane tank. We all sort of know what propane tanks are. So you can see, you can only see half of the propane tank there. So just for some scale of how high this was in certain places, halfway up the propane tank.
So that's buried. Huh?
Yes. Yep. And this is presumably the Department of Environmental Quality inspector out there. again, that doesn't look like foam to me. I also don't know if I would stick my hand in it with just nitrile gloves on, but they were out there. This is what it looked like. Yeah. And then this is super clear. The far right, that's just the light brown is dirt. There is a clear line of waste right there. That darker stuff, that is all oozing out of that digester cover. And then again, the black in the back is the digester cover itself. Same thing. Just oh, one thing that I don't think we super mentioned this. We mentioned that the spill lasted for weeks, and it like oozed out of the cover for weeks. They couldn't contain this foam. In order to try to contain this foam material on the property and for it to not extend off the property or not to go into the swamp. And this is based on what we heard from DEQ. They started digging pits and trenches in order to try to like catch some of the liquid and foam waste. So we think that's what this is, which is just a pit of, I don't know, some sort of liquid waste from that digester.
What? Yeah. Wow.
Again, in terms of scale, like we showed you the propane tank. This is some kind of utility box or something, but clearly a couple feet off of the ground, at least 3 or 4, and the waste got into this. So just record of how high it got in certain places is sort of horrifying.
So is this the utility box that's back? Because it looks like the barn behind to the right of it, right?
Yeah.
You go back and look at here. Is that the utility box? No.
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm really not sure. You
weren't on the ground. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
DEQ shared these photos with us, which was great because we're still waiting on a lot of other records, but we don't have much context for the photos.
Right. Okay. And then the aerial. All right. Well, Jill and Sam, I really appreciate you taking the time today, and I don't see any comments, but if anyone comments later, I'll make sure that they'll forward the information to you. And once again, if you're listening, please contact or visit soundrivers.org. Is that correct? Yeah. And thank you for all that you do. I really appreciate it on behalf of our community. So
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Okay. Have a great day. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.